unaware his wife secretly owned the company he bragged about. He let his mistress slap her in front of their kids on Christmas Eve. But months later, she walked into a board meeting he wasn't allowed to enter. He didn't just fail her as a husband. He failed her as a father, in his own living room, beneath Christmas lights and in front of their children, while another woman stood where his wife should have been. On Christmas Eve, with wrapping paper still on the floor and the kids clutching half-open toys, Nicholas Holland stood next to a woman in a bright red dress, his colleague, Marla Gray, and bragged about the company he claimed he had built from nothing. "This is what pressure looks like," he said loudly, arm brushing Marla's. "Elaine doesn't really understand business." Across the room, Elaine Connor, his quiet wife, the one who cooked the meals, calmed the kids, and stayed out of the spotlight, and stood near the tree, hands folded so the children wouldn't see them tremble. To everyone else, she was just the soft-spoken mother in a simple dress, the woman who didn't get it, the one who should be grateful. Marla stepped closer, smiling with practiced sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Some people don't belong everywhere they're invited," she said, gaze locked on Elaine. And then, in front of the children, in front of family, in front of a man who was supposed to protect her, Marla raised her hand and slapped Elaine across the face. The room went silent. Nicholas didn't move. He didn't shield his wife. He looked at her with disgust and said, "Clear enough for everyone to hear. You brought this on yourself. Always a burden." What most people in that room didn't know, not Nicholas, not Marla, not the relatives clutching their phones, was that the woman they just humiliated already held something far more powerful than their approval. The company Nicholas bragged about like a trophy, on paper, in trusts and signatures he'd skimmed but never really understood, it had never truly been his. Months later, when he walked down a quiet hallway toward a board meeting and found the door locked to him but opening for her, that Christmas Eve would come back to him in a way he could never escape. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like leaving Elaine standing alone in that living room while everyone else looks away. When you hit that button, you stand with every quiet soul who was mocked, erased, yet still rose. Please subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The room was loud with laughter, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, and at the center of it stood 38-year-old Nicholas Holland, confident, polished, halfway through another story about himself. He lifted his glass higher than necessary, enjoying the way conversations bent toward him. They usually did. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man people assumed was successful before he ever opened his mouth. And once he did, he made sure no one doubted it. He spoke about his company, his sacrifices, his long nights carrying the weight of everyone else. Just behind him, half a step back, stood his wife, 35-year-old Elaine Connor. She wasn't holding a drink. She was holding a small plate, one hand steadying it, the other resting lightly at her side, a posture learned over years of not interrupting. Her expression was calm, almost gentle, but her eyes stayed alert, tracking the room the way mothers always did, checking exits, counting heads, making sure the children hadn't wandered too far. Nicholas laughed mid-sentence and said something about how pressure wasn't for everyone, how some people stayed home, sheltered, while others built empires. He didn't look at Elaine when he said it, but the pause afterward made it clear who he meant. Elaine smiled faintly. She always did. To outsiders, it looked like patience. To family, it looked like loyalty. To Nicholas, it looked like proof that he was right, that she knew her place and accepted it. No one in the room noticed the thin leather folder tucked under Elaine's arm. Dark brown, worn at the edges. Always with her when paperwork was involved, always quiet, always closed. Elaine had a habit that confused people who thought they knew her. She let other people take credit. At home, that habit looked like calm. At family dinners, it looked like silence. In her marriage, it looked like devotion, the kind that never corrected, never challenged, never embarrassed. Nicholas loved telling the story of his rise. He told it often, at work mixers, at holidays, even to strangers in line. He described how he had saved a struggling logistics company, how he had taken risks, how he had shouldered responsibility while Elaine focused on the children. She wouldn't understand that kind of pressure, he liked to say, shaking his head with a practiced smile. Elaine would excuse herself then, check on the kids, refill a cup, anything to keep the peace intact. But the truth of Elaine Connor didn't begin with Nicholas. It began years earlier, long before his speeches and the applause. Elaine grew up in rooms filled with documents, not noise. Her father, Aaron Dickerson, had been a quiet man with steady hands and careful eyes. He ran a regional logistics company, Dickerson Freight, that never chased attention, but never failed either. Trucks moved on time, contracts were honored, people were paid. When Elaine was young, she used to sit at the corner of his desk doing homework while he reviewed reports. He didn't simplify things for her, he explained them. Ownership isn't about being loud, he once told her, sliding a document toward her. It's about responsibility, and the people who shout the most usually understand it the least. When Aaron died unexpectedly, Elaine was 26. People assumed his brothers or some longtime manager would take over. Instead, lawyers gathered in a quiet conference room and explained what Aaron had arranged years earlier. Through carefully structured shares, Elaine became the controlling owner of Dickerson Freight, not publicly, not loudly, but legally and completely. The board knew, the lawyers knew. A professional trustee was appointed to vote the shares according to her written instructions. To the outside world, though, the company looked like it belonged to a cluster of institutional investors. Advisors suggested she step forward, take the title, sit at the head of the table. Elaine chose something else. She remembered her father's voice, low and deliberate, in one of their last serious talks. If you ever love someone proud, he had said, protect yourself quietly. Don't argue with ego, prepare for it. So she did. Years later, when the board recruited an ambitious operations manager named Nicholas Holland to modernize systems and drive growth, Elaine watched his early performance from a distance. He was undeniably talented, charismatic. He brought in new contracts, staff liked him, revenue climbed. He also loved attention. He talked a little too long in meetings, took up a little too much space in discussions, but back then, it still looked like confidence, not contempt. Elaine met him at a company event, not as the owner, but as the founder's daughter visiting old colleagues. He was drawn to her calm, her steadiness, her refusal to be impressed by his jokes. They fell in love, or something close enough that she believed in it. When they married, Elaine placed her shares into a blind family trust. She appointed an independent legal custodian. She kept her name off any document Nicholas ever glanced at in daily operations. On paper, the trust was the majority owner. Inside sealed instructions, only the trustee and company counsel saw Elaine's full authority. At home, it was almost never mentioned. Not because Nicholas asked her to hide it, because she saw what ambition did to him. She saw how his confidence sharpened when he felt admired, how his tone shifted when he felt superior, how quickly pride replaced partnership. Elaine chose love over visibility, believing, at the time, that silence was safer. Back in the present, Nicholas finished his story to another round of approval. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, someone called him impressive. Elaine felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not pain, not yet, but awareness. She noticed things others didn't, how Nicholas barely skimmed contracts anymore, how he signed where he was told, how certain letters from the trustee never crossed the kitchen table because Elaine redirected them first, asking counsel for clarification before forwarding anything he needed to see. She had been correcting legal language quietly for years, fixing mistakes before they mattered, protecting him from consequences he didn't know he was courting. He mistook that protection for weakness. As the gathering continued, Elaine stepped away, slipping into the hallway to check on the children. Their laughter grounded her. Their trust reminded her why she had stayed quiet for so long. Behind her, Nicholas began another story, this one about his board, about how his company was moving into a new phase, about how he was finally getting the recognition he deserved. Elaine paused just long enough to listen. She didn't turn around. She didn't correct him. She didn't interrupt. She simply held the leather folder a little tighter, because silence, she knew, was only powerful when it was chosen. And one day soon, Nicholas Holland would mistake that silence for something else entirely. A woman who doesn't speak, he would think, is a woman who has nothing to say. The house lights dimmed as the evening wound down. Elaine ushered the children toward their coats, already sensing a shift in the air the way pride was hardening into something sharper. Something that would soon invite another presence into their lives, someone who wouldn't stay half a step behind. Elaine didn't know her name yet, but she could already feel the space being cleared. In the next room, Nicholas laughed again, unaware that the story he loved telling was standing quietly behind him, waiting for the moment it would finally be told differently. Just, don't embarrass me tonight. The words landed hard, sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the bedroom. Nicholas stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, jaw tight, eyes fixed on his own reflection. He didn't look at Elaine when he said it. He didn't need to. The sentence wasn't an invitation to respond, it was a warning. Elaine froze for half a second. She was already dressed a simple, soft-colored dress, chosen because it was comfortable and easy to move in. The kids were with a sitter. She had planned to be home early. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. She studied Nicholas's reflection instead of her own, the impatience in his movements, the faint irritation pulling at the corners of his mouth. It's just stress, she told herself. A big quarter, a coming board review. That's what marriage was, she reminded herself, absorbing pressure so it didn't spill everywhere else. She nodded once, quiet, automatic. Nicholas exhaled, satisfied, and grabbed his phone. The screen lit up briefly before he turned it face down again. It buzzed once, then stopped, Elaine noticed. She always noticed. The event space buzzed with energy, low music, clinking glasses, clusters of people dressed to impress. Nicholas seemed to expand the moment he walked in. His shoulders straightened, his voice grew louder. People turned toward him without being asked. Nick, tell us how you pulled that off. Nicholas laughed, warm and confident. He started telling the story again, the one about rescuing Dickerson Freet, about late nights, about pressure Elaine wouldn't understand. Elaine stood beside him, half a step back. At first she stayed quiet, let him talk, let him shine. That had always been their unspoken agreement. But when someone asked about a recent shipment delay, Elaine spoke softly, instinctively. It was weather-related, she said. The rerouting. Nicholas waved his hand without turning toward her. You wouldn't understand, he said lightly, smiling at the group. She doesn't really know business. The laughter that followed was polite, controlled, safe. Elaine felt the heat rush to her face, then drain away just as fast. She took a step back, physically giving him more space, as if shrinking might make the moment disappear. He didn't notice. Or worse, he did. As the night went on, Elaine watched the shift solidify. Nicholas leaned closer to the people praising him. He interrupted others now, corrected them, claimed victories that had never been his alone. When Elaine placed a hand lightly on his arm to remind him of time, he brushed it away. Handle it, he muttered under his breath. I'm busy. The word handle echoed in her chest. Later, Elaine stepped out onto the balcony for air. That was when she heard the laughter. Not the polite kind from inside. This was lower, intimate, confident. Nicholas stood a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear, posture relaxed in a way Elaine hadn't seen in months. You're right, he said quietly, a smile curling at his mouth. She doesn't get it. Some people are just liabilities. The word hit Elaine harder than the insult earlier. Liability. He laughed again, softer this time, and turned away slightly, lowering his voice. Elaine stepped back into the shadows before he could see her. She didn't confront him, not then. She didn't cry. She didn't demand answers. Instead, she began collecting details. The changes came quickly after that. Passwords stopped working. Shared accounts needed verification. Nicholas grew defensive when she asked simple questions. Her joint debit card declined once at the grocery store, just long enough for the cashier to apologize, just long enough for a stranger behind her to sigh impatiently. Elaine called the bank from her car. The representative explained that large transfers had been made into a business operations account Nicholas controlled. That night, Nicholas blamed the bank. Later, when she asked why he hadn't told her, he blamed her. You've always been bad with money, he snapped. You spend too much. You don't know pressure like I do. Elaine stared at him, searching his face for the man she married. The one who used to listen. The one who used to say, we. She found something else instead. Resentment. And beneath it, contempt. When he called her dead weight for the first time, the words settled into the room like dust, coating everything it touched. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften it. He said it like a fact. Elaine said nothing. Silence had become her shield. That night, after the children were asleep, Elaine sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She reached for the thin leather folder she hadn't opened in months. Inside were documents she knew by heart, trust agreements, ownership clauses, protections her father had insisted on. She read them again slowly, grounding herself in their language. Everything was still intact. Everything was still protected, financially at least. But as Elaine closed the folder, she felt something shift inside her, a realization settling deeper than fear. Protection, she understood now, didn't stop disrespect. It didn't stop humiliation, and it certainly didn't stop someone who believed your silence meant you had no power left to lose. Elaine turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark for a moment, listening to Nicholas's muffled voice upstairs, laughing into his phone again. A laugh she didn't recognize anymore. Somewhere in that laughter, she sensed, there was room being made for someone else. And when that someone arrived, Elaine knew the cruelty would no longer be quiet. The next insult wouldn't be spoken behind her back. Elaine first saw Marla Gray standing where Elaine usually stood. The realization hit her like a sudden drop in the stomach, sharp, immediate, disorienting. It was a small pre-holiday gathering, nothing formal. Just a few colleagues, a few friends, lights strung too neatly to feel casual. Nicholas had insisted on hosting some key people from work at the house. Elaine had stepped into the room with practiced calm, already scanning for the children, already bracing for Nicholas's mood on a night tied to company politics. And then she saw it. Her place was taken. Not aggressively, not loudly, just occupied. The woman wore red, not festive red, not soft red, but confident, red-fitted, deliberate, the kind of color chosen by someone who expected to be seen. She stood close to Nicholas, angled slightly toward him, body relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair Elaine usually used during these gatherings. Nicholas didn't move her. That was the first shock. He smiled instead. "Elaine," he said, voice bright, almost overeager. "This is Marla Gray. She's important at work." The pause before important lingered longer than it should have. Elaine nodded politely. She offered her hand. Marla took it loosely, eyes flicking over Elaine's fingers, her shoes, the cut of her dress, a slow, assessing scan that felt less like curiosity and more like measurement. "So this is her," Marla said, smiling as if she were confirming something to herself. Elaine felt the heat rise but kept her posture steady. Marla leaned closer to Nicholas and murmured something too quiet to hear. Nicholas laughed, not his polite laugh, but the one he used when he felt admired. Elaine stepped aside, instinctively giving space. No one noticed. Marla Gray was younger than Elaine by a few years, early 30s, polished, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who spoke with certainty, using words like efficiency and strategy like they were moral virtues. Elaine learned who she was quickly. Marla was an outside operations consultant, brought in, Nicholas said, to streamline things and get the company ready for real growth. He talked about her ideas with excitement he hadn't shown Elaine in months. He repeated Marla's phrases at dinner, nodding as if they were revelations. "She sees the bigger picture," he said once. "She's not emotional about it." The words landed like a quiet accusation. That first night, Elaine heard Marla's voice again in the hallway. "She's sweet," Marla said, not unkindly, "but soft. You've outgrown that." Elaine stood frozen just beyond the doorway, breath shallow, heart thudding in her ears. Nicholas didn't disagree. That was worse than if he had. From that night on, Marla didn't fade. She expanded. At the office, staff saw her in meetings she technically wasn't supposed to lead. At home, she began appearing in stories. Nicholas told Marla suggested this. Marla says that's outdated until her name floated through their dining room, more often than Elaine's. Then she started showing up in person, first as the consultant who happened to be nearby, dropping in after late meetings to continue urgent discussions at the house. Then as a regular presence, arriving before Elaine finished setting the table, offering to help in a way that never actually helped. She moved through Elaine's kitchen with ease, commenting on decor, opening cabinets, standing too close to Nicholas. Once Elaine found her pouring coffee from Elaine's mug. "You don't mind, right?" Marla said lightly, already sipping. "I feel like I'm practically family now." Elaine forced a smile. Marla corrected Elaine in front of others. About schedules, about plans, about things Elaine had managed quietly for years. She laughed softly at Elaine's clothes once, tilting her head. "You're very Simple, she said. It's refreshing. Some people try too hard. Nicholas chuckled. Elaine stopped laughing with them after that. The first time Elaine tried to talk to Nicholas about it, she chose her moment carefully. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. I feel pushed aside, Elaine said calmly. She crosses boundaries. Nicholas sighed, rubbing his face. You're overreacting, he said. She's helping me. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing. The sentence slammed a door. After that, Nicholas stopped pretending. Marla did too. She took Elaine's usual seat at the table without asking. She leaned into Nicholas during conversations. She made comments about upgrades and moving forward, always glancing at Elaine afterward. Once as Elaine gathered plates, Marla laughed and said to the group, Some people don't belong everywhere they're invited. A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one challenged her. Elaine's hands trembled slightly. She steadied them against the counter. Silence had always been her shield. But shields, she was learning, invited attack when mistaken for surrender. The children noticed before Elaine fully accepted what was happening. One evening, as Elaine tucked her daughter into bed, the girl hesitated, then whispered, Why does Daddy smile more when she's here? The question broke something open in Elaine's chest. She brushed her daughter's hair gently, searching for an answer that wouldn't burden a child. I don't know, she said finally. And for the first time, she admitted to herself how dangerous not knowing had become. Elaine began paying closer attention to how Marla positioned herself between Elaine and Nicholas in rooms, to how Nicholas deferred to Marla's opinions automatically, to how the atmosphere shifted when Marla entered heavier, sharper, colder. And beneath it all, Elaine felt something building, not just disrespect but preparation, as if space was being cleared, as if the house itself were being rearranged for someone else. Elaine stood alone in the living room one night, watching Marla laugh beside Nicholas, watching her red dress glow against the soft holiday lights. Christmas decorations were already up. The tree stood tall in the corner, lights blinking quietly, patient and unaware. Elaine wrapped her arms around herself, a strange calm settling in. Christmas was only days away, and something told her that whatever line still existed in this house, it wouldn't survive the holiday. The slap didn't come out of chaos, it came out of order. The house was full that night. Nicholas's relatives, a few colleagues from the company, the children in new pajamas racing around with toys. Christmas music played low in the background. The smell of roasted food clung to the air. To anyone walking in for the first time, it looked like a normal Christmas Eve. Elaine knew better. She had spent the day moving on autopilot, cooking, tidying, guiding the kids through their excitement, keeping her voice gentle even when her chest felt tight. Nicholas had insisted that some important people from work join them this year. It's good optics, he'd said. We're a family company. It looks stable. He hadn't said for my image, but he didn't need to. Marla arrived early. Red dress, red lipstick. No shame. She greeted Nicholas first, arms looping easily around his neck. Then she turned to Elaine and offered a polite hug that never got close enough to actually touch. Thank you for having us, she said, as if the house weren't already treating her like it recognized her footsteps. Elaine nodded. Of course. The evening slid by in careful slices. Elaine handed out plates, helped the kids set up their toys, smiled for photos she didn't want to be in. She watched quietly as Nicholas hovered near Marla more than he did near his own children. He's under a lot of pressure, a cousin whispered once, trying to be kind. Elaine just nodded. Later in the living room, with wrapping paper scattered on the floor and the children showing their gifts to anyone who would look, Nicholas positioned himself near the tree. Marla stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. This, Nicholas said loudly, gesturing around him, is what pressure looks like. Building something from the ground up, most people can't handle it. He didn't look at Elaine, but his eyes flicked past her. Elaine doesn't really understand business, he added, with a practiced half-laugh. A relative laughed weakly, unsure. Elaine felt several pairs of eyes flick toward her, then away. No one spoke. One of Nicholas's uncles tried to change the subject. Well, whatever you're doing, Nick, it's working. The company's growing. Marla smiled, tilting her head. With the right leadership, she said. You have to make tough calls. Some people hold you back without meaning to. Her gaze slid over to Elaine. Earlier that evening, in the kitchen, a smaller incident had already planted the seed. Nicholas had been telling a detailed story about a large client contract. The numbers he quoted were off. The date he gave for the contract's renewal was wrong off by months. Elaine, who still read every quarterly report the trustee sent, corrected him gently. The renewal was in March, not January, she said. You were in Chicago then, remember? Nicholas flushed, just slightly, in front of the two colleagues listening. Marla had stepped in quickly, hand on his arm. She nitpicks, she said with a soft laugh. It's cute at home, but it makes him look bad in front of people. The word bad had lodged in Nicholas's ego like a splinter. By the time they reached the living room, Marla had leaned into that wound. She keeps undercutting you, she had whispered, in front of your own staff. If you don't stop it now, the board will think you're weak. Nicholas, already raw and proud, believed her. Back in the living room, Elaine stood near the edge of the group, hands loosely clasped, the children moving in and out of her orbit. Marla turned toward her. Well, she said lightly, swirling the wine in her glass, I suppose it's time we stop pretending. Elaine's heart rate ticked up. Pretending about what? She asked quietly, glancing at the children, who were close enough to hear tone if not words. That this, Marla, gestured vaguely in Elaine's direction, is working. A few relatives shifted uneasily. Someone muttered, Hey, maybe not in front of the kids. Nicholas didn't step in. Elaine opened her mouth, not to argue to de-escalate, to move the conversation away from the children. She didn't get the chance. Marla stepped forward. The slap was deliberate, measured, not impulsive. Her eyes were clear. Her arm didn't shake. Her palm met Elaine's cheek with a sharp crack that cut straight through the music and the murmurs. Elaine's head turned with the force of it. Heat exploded across her cheek. The sound echoed off the walls, louder than the carols, louder than the little gasps someone tried and failed to swallow. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then the children screamed. One dropped a toy. One ran toward Elaine. Another pressed against the couch, eyes wide. Elaine staggered back, one hand flying to her face, the other reaching blindly toward her children. Her ears rang, her vision blurred at the edges. The taste of metal filled her mouth. A cousin started to step between them. Nicholas lifted a hand slightly, not to shield Elaine, but to stop his cousin. Nick, the cousin began. Nicholas cut him off with a look. Marla didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry either. She looked satisfied. Nick, what are you doing? Someone whispered harshly. Nicholas ignored them. Elaine dropped to her knees, gathering her crying children into her arms, shielding them with her body as if something else might come next. For a heartbeat, she waited. Not for apologies, for instinct, for Nicholas to move, to shout, to put himself between them. He didn't. He took a breath, looked straight at her, and said, his voice flat and clear enough for everyone to hear, You brought this on yourself. Always embarrassing me. Always a burden. The words hit harder than the slap. A burden. Around them, the room froze in a new way. Several people looked down. One aunt fumbled with her phone, filming but half aiming it at the carpet, too afraid to stop what was happening, too ashamed to look directly. No one stepped fully forward, some out of cowardice, some out of shock. Some because Nicholas was their provider now, the successful one, and they didn't want to get involved. Later, Elaine's lawyer would get copies of those shaky videos. But in that moment, all Elaine had was the burning in her cheek and the weight of small bodies clinging to her. That was when something inside her went quiet, not shattered, not broken, sealed. She stood slowly, her movements careful, controlled. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She didn't ask why. She looked at one of Nicholas's aunts, the one whose eyes were already wet with guilt, and said, Steady, can you please help the children upstairs? I need to get their things. The aunt nodded quickly, taking the children's hands, whispering soothing words as they moved toward the staircase. Marla watched Elaine with open triumph now. Nicholas said nothing. Nothing as Elaine walked past him. Nothing as she went up the stairs. Nothing as a door closed gently behind her. Upstairs, Elaine knelt beside small beds, hands shaking only when the children couldn't see her face. She checked their arms, their cheeks, making sure none of them had been hurt in the rush. They clung to her. Are we in trouble? One whispered. No, Elaine said firmly. You are not in trouble. This is not your fault. Downstairs, the murmur of voices rose and fell. A door opened. Closed. Someone left early, muttering about drama. No one called the police. Elaine sat on the floor beside her children until their breathing slowed. That was when she decided she would not raise them in a house where violence was performed and then justified as her fault. When they finally drifted into uneasy sleep, still in their clothes, Elaine stayed awake on the edge of the bed, cheek throbbing, mind suddenly very clear. She would leave. Not with a slammed door. With a plan. Because the woman who lay awake in that house on Christmas Eve was not the woman who would still be living there in the morning. And somewhere on a hard drive in someone's pocket, a shaking video already existed, a record that would later speak for her when other people refused to. Elaine left before the sun came up. Not in tears, not in panic. The decision had been made hours earlier on the edge of that bed, listening to her children whimper in their sleep every time a door creaked downstairs. She moved fast and quiet, heart steady, hands sure. The house was finally silent. Nicholas had gone to the guest room after most guests left, muttering something about needing space. Marla had called a car and slipped out just after midnight, not wanting to be around the children's crying. It was easier to leave when neither of them was watching. Elaine dressed the children gently, whispering that they were going to stay somewhere calmer for a while. They blinked sleepily but didn't argue. The older one looked at her cheek and didn't ask. Shoes, coats, backpacks, important documents she had already gathered in the night, the leather folder, a change of clothes each, medications, birth certificates from the file box she'd memorized the location of years ago. She didn't look at the walls. She didn't look at the photos. She didn't look back. By the time the first light touched the street, the house behind her was already something else, not a home, not a memory, just a structure she no longer needed to explain herself inside. Nicholas didn't call that morning. He slept in. When he finally came downstairs and saw the empty rooms, the absence of small voices, the neatly cleared shoe rack, he stood still for a long time. Then he got angry. And then he performed. He filed. And he made sure everyone knew it. Over the next days, he waved the divorce papers like a prop, telling anyone who would listen that Elaine had finally shown her true colors. He said she was unstable, too emotional, a burden he had carried for years. He hinted that money had gone missing, that she had never understood pressure, that she was a liability. He didn't say he had watched another woman hit her. He didn't say the children were there. People filled in the blanks the way people always do. Marla helped. She moved in fast, too fast for anyone who believed the "we were just colleagues" story. Neighbors saw her through the windows within days, barefoot, comfortable, wearing one of Elaine's old robes like it had always belonged to her. She sat in Elaine's chair at the table. She laughed loudly. She told friends openly, "This is where we'll live now." She didn't say Elaine's name. She didn't have to. Elaine heard all of this secondhand through texts that began with, "I didn't know how to tell you," and ended with, "I'm so sorry." Through pauses in conversations when people realized she wasn't hysterical, she was calm, composed, not begging. They mistook that calm for defeat. Elaine let them. The first meeting happened 2 days later, in a quiet office with frosted glass and no distractions. Janice Thomas, the lawyer, her father had told her to keep in her contacts just in case, was in her late 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but kind. Elaine hadn't needed her in all the years since Aaron's death. Now she did. Janice listened without interrupting. Elaine told the story plainly. The insults, the financial control, the slap, the fact that it had happened in front of their children, the video she'd been sent the next day by Nicholas's guilty aunt. Janice didn't gasp. She didn't dramatize. She nodded slowly, taking notes. "When did the financial changes begin?" she asked. Elaine gave dates. "When did documents start disappearing?" Janice asked. Elaine described the changed passwords and how household statements stopped arriving where they used to. She also mentioned the trustee letters Nicholas had never seen because, from the beginning, she had redirected those to herself. Janice set her pen down. "You did the right thing leaving," she said, "legally and as a mother. Now we document everything." That word document grounded Elaine. Janice explained the next steps carefully. Temporary custody protections, emergency orders, citing the violence in front of the children, financial discovery. And then she asked the question Elaine had been waiting for. "Do you want to understand where the money went?" Elaine nodded once. "Yes." The forensic accountant arrived a week later. Seth Gross, early 40s, quiet, precise, the kind of man who spoke only when necessary. He didn't ask about feelings. He asked for records. Bank statements, credit reports, emails, statements from the trustee where Nicholas had signed off on things he barely read. Elaine provided what she had screenshots she had taken months ago without fully knowing why. Dates she had written down instinctively, transactions that didn't feel right even then. She handed him the leather folder too. Seth studied everything carefully. "This wasn't random," he said finally. "This was intentional." Elaine felt a small shift inside her chest, not relief, not anger. Confirmation. They worked methodically, no rush, no theatrics. They traced transfers that didn't match household expenses, found consulting fees that led straight to accounts controlled by Nicholas and indirectly by Marla. Noticed how access permissions inside the company had changed around the same time Marla started appearing everywhere. Patterns formed. Elaine watched the evidence stack grow, neat and undeniable. She didn't celebrate. She waited. At night, when the children slept on air mattresses in the small apartment she'd rented, Elaine sat alone with her thoughts. She replayed moments she had once brushed aside, the way Nicholas had flinched when she corrected him, the way Marla had spoken with such certainty about internal company decisions she shouldn't have known, the way silence had been used against Elaine as proof she didn't understand. She understood now. Silence was not surrender. Silence was observation, and observation, when paired with truth, became leverage. Elaine never posted online, never defended herself in group chats, never explained. She let Nicholas talk. Every lie was a gift. Weeks began to form a rhythm. School drop-offs, lawyer meetings, emails from the trustee confirming they had received Janice's letters. Quiet evenings with the children where they read instead of tiptoeing around their father's temper. One afternoon, Seth called. "I found something," he said simply. Elaine closed her eyes. "Everything?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Everything." Elaine thanked him and ended the call. She sat very still after that. No shaking, no tears, just clarity. She opened the thin leather folder, the one that had followed her for years, and placed a single new document inside. At the top of the page was a date and a meeting time. Elaine closed the folder carefully, as if sealing something sacred. Because Nicholas Holland still believed he was standing on solid ground. He had no idea that beneath him, every support had already been removed. The floor wouldn't collapse loudly. It would simply refuse to hold him when the moment came. Elaine didn't fall apart. She dismantled. The work began before dawn most days, while the children still slept in the next room of the small apartment she'd rented on a month-to-month lease. Elaine sat at a cheap wooden desk, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, eyes steady. No dramatic revenge speeches. No obsession with Nicholas's social media. Just structure, just order, just truth. While Nicholas Holland celebrated his freedom, publicly posing with Marla at restaurants, tagging locations, soaking in comments about starting over, Elaine sat across from people who didn't care about feelings. They cared about facts. Her lawyer, Janice, spread documents across a conference table one morning. "Let's start with what we know for sure," Janice said. "Ownership." Elaine slid the thin leather folder across to her. Janice opened it and took her time. Inside were the trust agreements, the sealed custodian instructions, the original share certificates from Dickerson Freight, now operating under its modernized name, DF Logistics still listing the family trust as majority owner. "Your father was careful," Janice said quietly. Elaine nodded. "He knew I might need protection from someone I loved." Janice didn't flinch at that. "With these," Janice said, tapping the documents, "the board answers to the trust. And the trust answers to you. Nicholas is an employee with an executive title, not an owner." Elaine already knew that. Hearing someone else say, it still mattered. Seth, the forensic accountant, took longer. He worked from a separate office across town, sending only short emails for updates. "Need 3 more months of statements. Can you confirm this date? Did you authorize this transfer?" Elaine answered each question precisely. One afternoon, she sat with him in person. The table between them was covered in printed statements, highlighted entries, and spreadsheets. "This is what we've got," Seth said. "Company funds used to pay for flights that coincided with strategy retreats Nicholas took with Marla. Hotel stays coded as client development, luxury purchases marked as entertainment. A consulting entity set up in Marla's name, receiving steady monthly fees from DF Logistics for operational review. then transferring large portions out again within days. Was there any formal contract with her firm approved by the board? Seth asked. No, Elaine said. I'd have seen it in the trustee reports. Then this, Seth said, pointing to the pages, is a problem. For him, not you. He turned his laptop around. Emails appeared on screen, internal messages pulled from Discovery once Janice formally requested access as majority owner's legal representative. Nicholas forwarding internal strategy documents to Marla's personal email. Marla replying with coaching lines. Frame this as a temporary audit process. She won't understand the details. If she gets emotional, use that, say she's overwhelmed. People will believe it. Elaine read them silently. Her eyes didn't water. Her jaw just set a little tighter. Seth clicked to the next file. Internal notes Nicholas had written, assuming only friendly staff would ever see them. Need to push Elaine out of decision-making. She's dead weight. Marla recommends separating finances so she can't interfere. The word dead weight was underlined in one draft. Nicholas had never said that to Elaine in an email. He'd saved it for spoken arguments. He'd kept it for places where he thought there would be no record. He was wrong. Seth sat back. This is enough to demonstrate misuse of company funds and breach of fiduciary duty, he said, especially with his title. Elaine nodded once. Is it enough, she asked, that the board won't just see me as a bitter ex-wife? Yes, Seth said simply, because on paper, you're not just his ex-wife. He tapped the trust agreement. You're their controlling owner. At home, life settled into an odd rhythm. School drop-offs, lawyer meetings, budget grocery trips, cartoons on low volume in the evenings. The children stopped flinching when a man's voice got louder on TV. They started asking simple questions again, like which cereal to buy, instead of serious ones, like whether Daddy is mad. Elaine kept her answers age-appropriate. Daddy and I are making decisions with helpers, she would say. The helpers are making sure everyone is safe. At night, when the children slept, she opened the leather folder. She added new documents beside the old. Judge's temporary order granting her primary care of the kids until the court made a final decision. Confirmation from the trustee recognizing her as instructing party. Email from company counsel acknowledging receipt of Janice's letter requesting an emergency board session. The board had agreed. They wanted to review concerns. They didn't know yet how much Elaine had or how much she was willing to show. One evening, Janice sat back after going through another stack of Seth's summaries. He's exposed, Janice said, professionally and financially. But I need to ask you this. What do you want from the company, specifically? Elaine thought for a moment. I don't need revenge, she said. I need clarity. I want him removed from a position where he can hurt other people with the same carelessness. And personally, Janice asked, I want custody secured, and whatever financial settlement reflects reality, not the story he's been telling. Janice nodded. We'll use the board meeting to address him as an executive, she said. The divorce court will see him as a husband and father. Our job is to make sure those two pictures match. Elaine exhaled slowly. That's what she had been doing all along. Matching pictures, lining up actions and consequences, turning silence into a record. The call came on a rainy Thursday. Seth's voice was calm. I've finished the reconstruction, he said. Every dollar that left the company without approval. Every payment to Marla's shell consultancy. Every personal expense disguised as business. It's all in the report the board will see. Elaine closed her eyes. Thank you, she said. After they hung up, she sat very still. Then she opened the leather folder. Tucked behind the trust documents was a new paper one Janice had drafted and she had signed 2 days earlier. A formal motion, as majority owner, to convene an executive review of Chief Operations Officer Nicholas Holland for breach of fiduciary duty. At the top were the date and time the board had agreed to meet. Elaine slid the motion to the front of the folder. Nicholas still thought the upcoming meeting was his moment to pitch expansion. He didn't know the agenda had changed. The company he bragged about like a trophy was about to show him whose name was actually carved into its foundation. And for the first time in years, Elaine felt something close to anticipation, not of his downfall, of finally stepping into the room that had always, quietly, been hers. Nicholas Holland woke up that morning convinced he had survived the worst of it. The house felt different, but in a way he liked: quiet, controlled, stripped of drama. Elaine's presence no longer hung over every argument. The kid's absence, he told himself, was temporary. Court stuff. Nothing more. He stood in front of the mirror, straightening his tie, studying the man staring back at him. The faint lines around his eyes looked less like stress and more like experience, he decided. He had stories now. He'd spun them well. He had told anyone who would listen that Elaine had walked out irrationally, that she had never understood the pressure he was under, that she had tried to interfere with his company. He hinted that she had mental health issues, that she had become paranoid. He left out the parts about the slap. He left out the video. People believed the version they found easier to sit with. In the kitchen, Marla moved with the comfort of someone who had never paid for the space she occupied. She wore tailored pants and one of Elaine's old silk blouses, claimed, washed, and folded into her own drawers. She poured coffee into Elaine's mug without hesitation. "After today," Marla said, sliding the mug toward him with a smile, "this is all going to be behind us. Once the board hears your expansion plan, they'll know you're the future of DF Logistics." Nicholas liked the way she said "you're." He picked up his folder, thick with charts, projections, buzzwords he'd practiced until they sounded like strategy. "Executive review is just a formality," Marla added, smoothing his lapel. "Someone probably complained about the restructuring, but the board needs you. I'll sit in, back you up if needed." He nodded. He liked thinking of the meeting that way. Formalities, approvals, recognition, visibility equaled ownership. It always had, in his mind. The drive to the office felt ordinary. Traffic lights, buses, pedestrians, all moving through their own lives. Nicholas stayed on his phone almost the entire time, skimming congratulatory messages from friends and acquaintances who were still repeating his fresh start narrative. A notification from his lawyer sat unread. A message thread with Elaine's name had been silent for days. He scrolled past it. At the building entrance, Nicholas stepped through security with practiced ease. The guard nodded. The receptionist offered a neutral, "Good morning." Nothing felt off yet. He swiped his access card at the turnstile. The light flashed red. He frowned, swiped again, slower. Red. "Is there a glitch?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. The security guard checked the screen. "Your access level was adjusted overnight," he said. "You're still cleared to enter the building, but not executive floors without approval." Nicholas blinked. "Adjusted by who?" he demanded. "Corporate Security Administration," the guard said. "Probably tied to the executive review meeting." Marla stepped in smoothly. "This is ridiculous," she said with a short laugh. "We're literally going to the review that decides that access. Can you buzz us through? We're on the agenda." The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Let me confirm," he said. Nicholas forced a smile, as if this were mildly annoying but beneath his concern. But he felt it a small crack, opening. At the elevator, his assistant greeted him on the executive floor with an expression that was too carefully neutral. "Conference room?" he asked, adjusting his tie. "The board requested the main boardroom," she said. "Access is restricted today." "Restricted how?" Marla cut in, heels clicking too loudly in the quiet hallway. The assistant swallowed. "Only board members and individuals listed on the amended agenda," she said. "I sent you the update, Mr. Holland." Nicholas pulled out his phone, opened his calendar. The meeting title was no longer Expansion Strategy. It read, Executive Review, COO Conduct and Governance. He hadn't noticed the subject change the night before. His jaw tightened. "Who amended it?" he asked. "I only see the instruction from corporate counsel," his assistant said, "and a note that the trust representative will be present." Nicholas frowned. "Which trust?" She looked at him, genuinely surprised. "The majority owner trust," she said. "The one that's always been on the cap table?" Marla's hand on his arm stiffened. Nicholas waved it off. "It's procedural," he said, more to himself than anyone. "They want their boxes ticked." He walked toward the boardroom. The door was closed. Through the glass, he could see board members filtering in, taking their seats. No one waved him in. No one signaled. His nameplate was still in front of an empty chair near the middle of the table, not at the head. He told himself that didn't matter. He reached for the handle. A security guard stepped smoothly into his path. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holland," the guard said quietly. "The instructions say to wait outside until you're called." Nicholas stared at him. Called by who? He asked. The guard glanced at the tablet in his hand. Trust representative, he said. Or the board chair. Trust representative. Nicholas's chest tightened. For the first time, the word ownership flickered in his mind, not as something he had, but as something he might not. Behind him, Marla's phone buzzed. She checked the screen quickly. Her eyes narrowed, but this time, not in confidence. In caution. Inside the boardroom, the clock ticked to the hour. The meeting began. Without him. The hallway outside the boardroom had never felt long before. Today, it did. Nicholas stayed near the glass, pretending to scroll his phone, pretending not to care that he was the only executive still standing in the hallway instead of sitting at the table. He'd been on the other side of that glass so many times, striding in, cracking jokes, commanding the room with easy charm. Now he watched someone else take that walk. The door opened. The boardroom fell quiet. Elaine Connor stepped inside. Not as a guest, not as a spouse, not as an afterthought. She wore a tailored suit in a neutral shade, the kind that didn't ask for attention but naturally received it. Her hair was pulled back neatly. In her hand, as always, was the thin leather folder Nicholas had never bothered to ask much about. This time, the board members noticed it. She didn't glance toward the glass immediately. She walked straight to the head of the table, where the board chair usually sat. Today, the chair was angled slightly to the side, making room. The chair remained in the room. Nicholas did not. Elaine placed the folder on the polished wood, opened it calmly, and took a seat at the end of the table in the space reserved for the representative of the majority owner. No one questioned her. Corporate counsel simply nodded, as if they had been expecting her all along. Only then did she lift her gaze toward the hallway. For a brief moment, her eyes met Nicholas's through the glass. There was no gloating in them, no visible hatred, just distance, clarity, recognition not of who he was, but of where he no longer stood. Then she turned away. Let's begin, the board chair said. The door closed. The sound was soft, final. Nicholas stared at his own faint reflection in the glass and at the silhouettes behind it. He saw documents being passed, a projection screen lighting up, faces leaning forward with focus. He couldn't hear the words, but he recognized the rhythm. He'd sat through enough reviews to know the difference between a casual briefing and a serious inquiry. This was the latter. Beside him, Marla's posture had changed. She was no longer standing like a partner. She had shifted, ever so slightly, closer to the exit. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, eyes scanning a short message quickly. Her face went pale. What? Nicholas snapped. She didn't answer. Inside, Elaine stood. Graphs appeared behind her, clean, simple visuals. Seth's work. From where he stood, Nicholas could see lines trending in directions he didn't like. One bar labeled Authorized Company Expenses ended far lower than another labeled Actual Outgoing Payments. His name appeared beneath several of the bars. So did Marla's. Nicholas pressed closer to the glass. He almost didn't hear the security guard approach. I need you to step back from the door, sir, the guard said. Nicholas didn't move. That's my meeting, he said through his teeth. The guard checked the tablet again. According to this, he said, it's the trust's meeting. You'll be invited in if and when they request your presence. If and when. Nicholas turned back toward the glass. Inside, Elaine pointed to a section of the screen. A board member asked a question. Elaine replied, turning a page in her folder, handing something to the board chair. Nicholas caught a glimpse of a still frame on the next slide. A frozen image of his own living room, Christmas lights in the background, wrapping paper on the floor, Marla's arm in mid-motion. His own face, visible and passive in the corner of the frame. His stomach dropped. He hadn't known the video existed. He hadn't known Elaine had it. Marla took a step away from him. Where are you going? He hissed. She gave a tight, brittle smile. I need to make a call, she said. My firm. You don't have a firm, he snapped. She didn't deny it. She just kept walking. For the first time since she'd entered his life in that red dress, Marla moved in the opposite direction of whichever way Nicholas was looking. Inside, another slide flicked onto the screen. This time, he could read the title clearly through the glass. Executive Summary of Misuse of Company Funds, N. Holland, M. Gray. The board chair's expression hardened. Elaine didn't look toward the glass again. She was no longer reacting to Nicholas. She was addressing the people who actually controlled his professional fate. People who now understood that the quiet woman he dismissed as a burden had been the majority owner's voice all along. Nicholas felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Not anger, not indignation, fear, not of losing money, of losing the story he'd built about who he was. And for the first time, he understood what the red light on the badge reader that morning had really meant. He wasn't just temporarily locked out. He had already been removed from the room where decisions were made. He just hadn't realized it until now. The boardroom settled into that particular kind of quiet that felt almost heavy. Elaine stood at the end of the table, the leather folder open, pages lined up in a neat, deliberate order. "Thank you," she said, "for allowing me to present in my capacity as representative of the majority owner trust." A small, simple sentence. It rewrote years of assumption in a single breath. Some board members already knew the structure in theory. None of them had ever seen her exercise it like this. Elaine began with the trust itself. She explained clearly, without embellishment, how Aaron Dickerson had transferred controlling shares of Dickerson Freight, now DF Logistics, into the family trust. How the trust's voting rights had always been tied to detailed instructions she had signed. How, when Nicholas was hired, he had been brought in as an employee with a generous compensation package, but no equity ownership beyond a small performance-based grant. Confirmation documents appeared on the screen: signatures, dates, the original trust deed, amendments that clarified her role after her father died. Company counsel verified each one aloud. For the record. Next came Seth's findings. Elaine didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She walked through the numbers, line by line. "Here are legitimate business expenses," she said, indicating one column. "And here is a pattern of charges that cannot be justified by company policy or board-approved executive perks. Trips with no client meetings attached. Restaurant bills in cities where no vendor or customer logged visits. Payments marked for consulting to an entity that had never been presented to the board for approval. As of the end of last quarter," Elaine continued, "these unauthorized expenditures total this amount." The figure on the screen made two board members whistle under their breath. One cleared his throat, embarrassed. Corporate counsel looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Elaine clicked to the next slide. "So far, these charges point to poor judgment and breach of company policy," she said. "What elevates this to breach of fiduciary duty is what came next." Emails appeared. Nicholas forwarding Marla internal financial spreadsheets. Marla advising him on how to hide certain expenses within larger budget categories. Call it audit variance. No one reads the breakdowns. If she pushes, say she's overwhelmed, and you're handling the hard stuff. One board member shifted in his chair. "She in these messages refers to you?" he asked. Elaine shook her head. In Nicholas's mind, yes, she said. In legal reality, it refers to the trust. To the controlling owner he thought could be talked around with emotion. She let that sit. Then she clicked to the video still. "This," she said, voice still calm, "is not a company expense. But it is relevant to character and to the integrity expected from an executive responsible for our people and our reputation." A staffer dimmed the lights as the short video played. The room watched, in silence, as Nicholas's living room appeared. Christmas lights, children, Marla in red, the slap, Elaine going to her knees. Nicholas standing still. Someone muttered, "My God." A board member's jaw tightened. Another closed his eyes briefly. Elaine spoke only once the screen went dark. "I did not bring this to criminal court," she said. "Yet, but I am not prepared to allow a man who condones violence against the mother of his children in front of them to continue representing this company as one of its public faces." No one argued. Through the glass, Nicholas couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. He saw enough. He watched his own behavior, stripped of justification, played back without his commentary. He watched faces change when they saw him not as the storyteller, but as the subject. Earlier in the week, the board had questioned Nicholas privately, with counsel present. He'd been given the chance to explain the transfers, the invoices, the trips. He'd offered little beyond vague mentions of pressure and complaints about being misunderstood. No one in the room felt they needed to hear the same excuses again. When it was time to vote, the board chair's voice was formal. "The motion on the table," he said, "is immediate termination of Nicholas Holland from his position as Chief Operations Officer for breach of fiduciary duty." gross misuse of company funds, and conduct detrimental to the company's reputation, restitution, and legal recourse to follow the recommendations of counsel. Hands went up around the table. No one abstained. No one asked for more time. Elaine didn't smile. She simply closed the folder. Corporate counsel slid a prepared packet toward the chair. "We've drafted the initial termination documents," counsel said. "The trust sign-off is already included." Elaine picked up the pen, signed. For years she had watched Nicholas sign things he didn't bother to read. Now he would feel what it was like to have his future altered by a signature he didn't see coming. Later that day, in a smaller room, a quiet press briefing took place, not a spectacle, just a controlled release. Elaine stood at a podium, a plain backdrop behind her with the DF Logistics logo. She didn't attack Nicholas by name. The lawyers had made sure of that. But she didn't hide behind vague language either. "Our company has completed a thorough internal review," she said. "We found serious misuse of company funds and conduct inconsistent with our values from a senior executive. That executive is no longer with us. We are cooperating fully with any further review and have initiated steps to make the company whole." Questions came. Was this related to her personal life? Was she the same Elaine mentioned in rumors tied to a viral video? She kept her answers clean. "My personal life has been in legal proceedings," she said. "I will say only this: I left a situation that was not safe for my children. The internal review process looked at documented facts, not gossip. The company will not be run on anyone's narrative except the truth." When asked about her role, she did not downplay it. "I represent the controlling interest," she said. "I chose to be quiet for a long time because I thought stability required it. I was wrong. Stability requires accountability." She stepped away from the podium as calmly as she had approached it. No dramatic walk-off, just completion. The divorce finalized weeks later. Custody went to Elaine with clear, written conditions about Nicholas's access: supervised visits, adherence to a therapist-approved plan, zero tolerance for any form of intimidation. The judge had seen the same video the board had. Nicholas tried to call. Once. Then again. Voicemails piled up: apologies, reinterpretations, pleas, blame. "I was under pressure. She manipulated me. You've always known I lean on people too hard." Elaine saved one of the messages for her legal file. She didn't respond to any. Silence, finally, was no longer her shield. It was her boundary. Marla left Nicholas the same way she had entered Elaine's life. Quietly, quickly, without loyalty. There was no dramatic fight, no long letter about how he'd failed her. One morning, Nicholas woke to a house that felt wrong again, not because it was full of tension, but because it was empty in the wrong places. Her side of the bed was bare. Her toiletries gone from the bathroom. The closet space she'd claimed was half empty, hangers swinging slightly. On the kitchen counter, beside the half-emptied coffee bag, sat a short note. "I can't be tied to this. I have to think of my career." No signature, no apology. The consulting entity in her name was already in the process of being shut down under legal pressure. The board's lawyers had included her in their findings. Other companies she'd hoped to impress quietly cut off contact. Status had evaporated. So had she. Nicholas stared at the note, then at the walls. He checked his email. "Your severance is under review, pending restitution. Your access to the company portal has been permanently revoked. Please direct all further communication through your legal caption, representative." The word pending followed him everywhere now. Pending settlement. Pending payment plans. Pending decisions about what kind of supervised access he would have to the children whose Christmas he had shattered. The house, once a stage for his stories, had become an echo chamber. His own voice was the only one left in it. Across town, Elaine woke up to a different kind of quiet, the kind that didn't make her brace. Light filtered through the windows of her new living room, smaller than the old one, but fully hers. The children sat cross-legged on the rug, arguing in that harmless way siblings do about which ornaments should go where on the tree they were decorating. Their laughter was unguarded. It sounded like it had when they were younger, before they learned to scan their father's face for mood changes. Elaine leaned in the doorway, a warm mug in her hands, listening. This was what remained. Not the house, not the car, not the image Nicholas had tried to curate. Her children, her clarity, her name on the documents that actually mattered. At work, the company settled into its new shape. Elaine didn't suddenly start showing up in every internal memo. That wasn't who she was. She installed a professional CEO with a clean record and a steady temperament. She remained as chair of the board and trust representative, approving clear policies about executive expenses and conflict of interest disclosures. Staff who had once looked away in hallways now sent short messages. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything earlier. I should have believed the way you looked that night. Thank you for cleaning this up the right way." Elaine read them all. She replied to some with a simple, "Thank you. Let's do better going forward." She didn't waste energy punishing them for the fear that had kept them still. Their work now would say more than any apology. At home, the kids slept through the night more often than not. They still went to therapy. So did Elaine. Healing was not a switch, but slowly the house stopped carrying the weight of what had happened in the old one. One evening, as Elaine tucked them in, her daughter looked at her seriously. "Mom," she said softly, "you're not quiet like before." Elaine smiled. "I'm still quiet," she said, "just not invisible." On the next weekend, they unpacked a box labeled Christmas. Elaine hadn't realized she'd brought the simple glass ornament from the old house until she unwrapped it. She turned it in her hand. It caught the light and scattered it across the wall. Last year, that ornament had hung in a room where violence was excused and children were told not to make things worse. This year, it would hang in a place where no raised hand would ever be tolerated. She handed it to her son. "Where should this one go?" she asked. He pointed to a branch at the center of the tree. "Right there," he said, "so we can all see it." She nodded. He hung it carefully. The anniversary of that Christmas Eve came and went without fanfare. Elaine didn't mark the date on a calendar, but her body remembered. That morning, she stood in the living room for a moment, watching the tree glow softly. No shouting, no slammed doors, no careful calculation about who was in which mood. Just the rustle of wrapping paper, the smell of something baking in the oven, and the sound of her children bickering lightly over whose turn it was to open the next gift. She thought of the woman she had been, a woman who let others take credit, who believed silence could save love, who protected a man who would not lift a hand to protect her. That woman hadn't been foolish. She had been trusting. She had been learning. Now she was something else. Boundaried, steady, visible. Elaine turned off the overhead lights so only the tree lit the room. She didn't think about whether Nicholas was lonely in his larger, quieter house. She didn't waste energy wondering if Marla regretted anything. Those stories were no longer hers to track. What mattered was this: her children, asleep in rooms without fear. Her company, guided by people who understood that responsibility is not about volume. Her own reflection, which she could finally look at without wondering if she'd failed by staying too long or leaving too early. Silence, she knew now, could be surrender. But it could also be strategy, and once dignity was reclaimed, it didn't ask for anyone's permission to exist. Elaine picked up her mug, listened to her children's voices drifting from down the hall, and smiled. The past had finally stopped banging on the door. The future no longer needed to knock. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.